Avoidant Tendencies, Why Some People Disappear When Things Get Difficult. I'm Ben Rufana, completing a very detailed, in-depth article. Definitely going to read directly from the article, so I include everything I want to convey. So there's something I, as well as many practitioners who work closely with others, therapists, body workers, teachers, healers, encounter quite often. It can at times feel very frustrating, especially if your orientation is toward direct engagement with experience, learning to work effectively with your own emotions, and personal responsibility. There are a few cultural dynamics here in the United States that likely contribute to this phenomena. First, avoidance is socially normalized here. In many environments, people are implicitly encouraged to move away from discomfort rather than toward it. Distraction, entertainment, constant digital engagement, and busyness make it easy to sidestep the realities of daily life, especially the pressing matters that need to be addressed and the emotional responses they evoke. Second, for the vast majority of people, there is very little training in emotional literacy. Most have never been taught how to remain present with difficult feelings, how to address relational conflict directly, or how to stay present in their bodies when strong emotions arise. When emotions intensify, many habitually default to strategies such as withdrawal, dissociation, intellectualization, or distraction. Third, the broader culture tends to emphasize individual autonomy over relational repair. That emphasis can be healthy in some contexts, but it also makes it easier for people to simply disappear, disengage, or avoid difficult conversations rather than working through them. For individuals such as myself who have spent decades doing the internal work required to heal and transform, intensive meditation, body-based practices, and vision quest, our tolerance for emotional intensity and psychological depth becomes much higher than the average person's. What feels like normal engagement to us can feel overwhelming to someone whose system isn't accustomed to remaining present with these deeper layers. That mismatch can at times create a sense of frustration. One of the difficult realities for those of us who are growth-oriented is that not everyone is ready for the level of presence and engagement we are offering. Some people will step toward it, but many will impulsively retreat when things begin to move beyond the surface. Over time, those of us who are practitioners of the healing arts often develop a kind of internal filter. We invest most of our time and effort in the people who demonstrate readiness and follow through, and we allow others to come and go without investing too much emotional bandwidth. It doesn't eliminate the frustration entirely, but it helps to keep our energy directed toward the people who are actually prepared to do the work. Learning to navigate this balance can take years of practice, and even then, it still tests our patience at times. For those of us working in a therapeutic capacity, avoidant tendencies are something we encounter quite often. A person may initially express a genuine desire to heal. They reach out for guidance. They describe painful relational patterns, unresolved grief, or the emotional wounds they carry from more recent heartaches and losses, as well as earlier experiences in life. But when the work begins to touch those deeper layers, it's not at all uncommon for someone undergoing the therapeutic process to postpone or cancel appointments. Messages go unanswered, and the person who initially seemed eager to engage gradually withdraws. Sometimes they abruptly disappear. From a practitioner's perspective, this can be difficult to watch. You can often sense that real progress is possible, yet as the process begins to move deeper into the body and into the emotional terrain where healing actually occurs, the person's maladaptive coping patterns begin to activate. When that happens, avoidance often takes over. This is not usually malicious or intentional. It's often a misguided attempt to avoid the emotions and experiences they are not willing to address or feel capable of handling. When someone has spent years avoiding certain emotions, genuine healing work can feel deeply threatening. At that point, many people simply withdraw from the work altogether. Remaining present with grief, abandonment, rejection, shame, facing responsibilities, handling intimacy, and dealing with the day-to-day realities of life requires a capacity many people have never developed. Those with a low coping capacity tend to retreat. They check out, flee the scene, and distance themselves from the very experiences that could have helped them heal and grow. What makes this dynamic even more complicated is that those of us who work in healing professions are not immune to it ourselves. We may spend years helping others navigate their emotional wounding and relational patterns. We may understand attachment dynamics intellectually. We may even recognize avoidant tendencies when they appear in the people we work with. Yet, when we form personal attachments, especially romantic ones, we can still find ourselves caught in these same dynamics. Many of us have experienced this firsthand when we become attached to someone with avoidant tendencies. At first, there is warmth, interest, and connection. The relationship seems promising. But as the emotional closeness begins to deepen, the other person becomes inconsistent. They pull back. Communication becomes sporadic, if not non-existent. Plans become uncertain. At times, they simply disappear. When you find yourself on the receiving end of this kind of push-pull dynamic, it can be profoundly destabilizing. The emotional push and pull activates powerful attachment responses. Longing intensifies, confusion grows, the mind searches endlessly for explanations. I thought we had a connection. What happened? Was any of it real? Those of us who work in therapeutic roles tend to be highly empathic. We are often people who value closeness, emotional depth, and genuine connection, and many of us have spent considerable time doing the intensive work necessary to heal our own emotional wounds and transform the relational patterns that have shaped our lives. Some of us struggle with anxious attachment tendencies ourselves, which can make us especially sensitive to the dynamics that unfold in close relationships. This is where the two worlds intersect. Even with years of meditation, body-based practices, psychological understanding, and other forms of inner work, forming an attachment to someone with avoidant tendencies can still activate the more vulnerable parts of us that have yet to heal. Intellectually, we may understand what is happening, but emotional attachment does not operate primarily at the level of intellect. It lives in the body. And when attachment bonds are activated, even those of us who are highly self-aware can find ourselves struggling with the same questions and emotional turbulence that many others experience. Understanding avoidant tendencies can help bring clarity to these situations. It can help us to see what appears to be confusing or contradictory behaviors often reflects deeper patterns of avoidance. Recognizing this does not eliminate the pain entirely, but it can help us respond with greater insight and understanding, both as practitioners and as human beings navigating our own relationships. Avoidant tendencies often show up in recognizable ways, such as withdrawing when conflict arises, avoiding difficult conversations, or shutting down emotionally when things become uncomfortable. Those who are uncomfortable with emotional intimacy may become overwhelmed as a relationship begins to deepen and may disappear for periods of time or ghost entirely. Instead of remaining present with what they are feeling, they may intellectualize the situation or distance themselves from it altogether. At the core, these patterns are ways of running from what they are feeling and the realities of life as they unfold in their midst. These tendencies rarely appear out of nowhere. In many cases, they develop early in life in homes where emotions were not safe to express. Parents may have been distant, inconsistent, or unable to respond to their child's emotional needs. As a result, the child learns that suppressing feelings is safer than expressing them. Over time, this becomes a survival strategy. People learn to disconnect from their emotions, numb themselves, or dissociate from what they are experiencing internally. What begins as a way of coping eventually becomes a deeply ingrained relational pattern. Some individuals are not unconsciously avoiding their emotions, they are simply disconnected from them. This can show up as being in their head rather than in their body. Difficulty identifying or expressing feelings, becoming overwhelmed when strong emotions arise, or shutting down instead of working through conflict. From the outside, it may look like indifference, but internally, the person may simply lack the capacity to remain present with what they are feeling. For those of us who form attachments to individuals with avoidant tendencies, the experience can be extremely confusing. At times, a person may appear warm, engaged, and genuinely interested. The connection feels real, but as emotional closeness deepens, the dynamic often changes. Even though it may seem the connection is growing stronger, they often lack the capacity to sustain that level of intimacy. The sudden change can leave us feeling rejected, destabilized, and searching for answers. These dynamics are common in push-pull relationships where moments of closeness are followed by periods of distance and withdrawal. Many of us try to repair these situations by reaching out repeatedly or attempting to help the person to work through their difficulties. Certain aspects of modern culture reinforce and amplify these patterns. Digital distraction allows people to avoid emotional discomfort almost indefinitely. Endless scrolling, entertainment, and online engagement make it easy to stay distracted rather than sitting with what we feel inside. At the same time, difficult conversations are often avoided rather than addressing problems and working through emotions that arise. When conflict and emotions go unaddressed, they often create distance and gaps within our relationships. Ghosting has also become normalized. Combined with the widespread lack of emotional literacy, these cultural influences make avoidant tendencies far more common. As a result, avoidance is no longer an individual pattern. In many ways, it has become part of the broader culture. Many of us have spent years trying to fix or rescue avoidant partners or those we hope to build a relationship with. We try to explain, reassure, or help the person we formed an attachment to understand their behavior. We hope that with enough patience or effort, the relationship will stabilize. Sooner or later, however, we are forced to come to terms with the difficult reality. We cannot do someone else's emotional work for them. Meaningful change requires personal willingness. Someone who is not ready to examine their own emotional wounding and relational patterns cannot be forced to do so. For this reason, it is important to recognize the limits of what we can do for others. For meaningful change to occur, the person we are relating to must become willing to face their own patterns and the emotions they have been avoiding. Without that willingness, these dynamics almost always repeat. One of the most important steps is learning to recognize avoidant tendencies. That includes setting appropriate boundaries and resisting the impulse to chase someone who repeatedly withdraws or to try to fix another person or the relationship. It also means investing our time and energy in people who are capable of reciprocity and emotional presence. When we begin to understand avoidant tendencies more clearly, the ambiguous and often confusing words and actions of the person we formed an attachment to, and the relational dynamics we find ourselves caught up in, begin to make much more sense. Conflicted messages, emotional unavailability, distancing, and the intense heartbreak that often accompanies them can be better understood. For many of us, these realizations bring greater clarity. They help us not take things quite so personally, not feel that we are somehow at fault, and not blame ourselves. Often we come to the realization that these are simply the patterns the individual we care about and have grown attached to is caught up in. Teaching myself to face the issues that need to be dealt with head on and to stay present and digest my own emotional responses, no matter how unpleasant, has not only been an essential part of my healing and growth, it's what I had to do to survive. A friend of mine once told me about his father, who did multiple tours of duty in the Vietnam War and was going through absolute hell, yet his father would say to himself, "Face it, deal with it." And somehow that stuck with me. I internalized that message, and at times when I'd be going through difficulty, I would often repeat that to myself. Mine is a path of embodied presence, where I continually strive to show up more fully in each moment. At times, I have struggled to comprehend those who are not willing to do the same. Avoidant tendencies can change for those who are willing to face themselves. That usually involves developing greater emotional awareness, reconnecting with the body, and learning to stay present with difficult emotions rather than automatically withdrawing from them. It may also involve working through earlier wounds that shape these patterns in the first place. This kind of change doesn't happen quickly. It requires honesty, commitment, and a willingness to remain present with experiences that may have been avoided for many years. But when we, our partner, or anyone else becomes genuinely willing to engage in this process, meaningful change is possible. Some people disappear when faced with difficulty, or when their own emotional conflicts or uncomfortable emotions begin to surface. That is how they learn to cope. Understanding this can help us respond with greater clarity and compassion rather than endless hurt, frustration, disappointment, and confusion. It allows us to see that the behavior is often rooted in long-standing patterns rather than something we personally caused. At the same time, it's important to remember that healthy relationships require presence, communication, and emotional engagement from both people. Without these elements, a healthy and reciprocal connection that supports healing and growth cannot be sustained.